Okay, so picture this. It's, a Tuesday night. Maybe it's 7 o'clock. You've just finished dinner. Dishes are done. You're finally sitting down to unwind.
Yep, I know that feeling.
And you flip on the TV, or let's be real, you're probably just scrolling on your phone, right?
Right.
Twitter, TikTok, whatever. And then you see it, that red banner, breaking news.
It always gets you. That little jolt,
Attention?
the music changes, the whole tone shifts.
Exactly. It demands your attention. And there's a face on the screen. It's usually a photo, maybe pulled from Instagram, probably a selfie or a graduation picture. And the headline is huge, missing. And just like that, everything kind of stops.
We've all seen it.
Yeah.
And you immediately feel that pit in your stomach. You see the search parties, you hear about the helicopters, you see the family pleading at a press conference. It's a really compelling and obviously tragic story.
But just pause there for a second. I want you, listening right now, to really visualize that face. The face you usually see when a case gets that wall-to-wall, 204/7 cable news treatment. If we're being totally honest with ourselves, who are we usually looking at?
Well, if we're going by the last, say, 2 decades of media coverage, statistically, you are probably picturing a young woman.
Young woman.
A young white woman, probably attractive, probably from a middle class or upper middle class background. The girl next door, if you will.
And that right there is the really uncomfortable thing we're going to get into today. It's a pattern that I think a lot of us feel. It's like this glitch we've all noticed but maybe haven't put a name to.
But it's not just a feeling. It's a documented, studied phenomenon. It has a name, it has a history, and it has some really, really devastating consequences.
We are talking about missing white woman syndrome.
And it's a term that I know it makes people bristle. It sounds accusatory.
He does.
But this deep dive isn't about blaming viewers or even diminishing the absolute tragedy of any single person who goes missing. It's about looking at a huge systemic bias in our media. It's a phrase that social scientists use to describe this massive, disproportionate coverage given to missing young, white, affluent women.
Compared to, well, everyone else.
Exactly. Compared to men, compared to people of color, and very specifically compared to women of color. It's about who gets that primetime slot and who gets, maybe a brief mention on the local news at 11, if they're lucky.
And today, we're not just going on feelings. We have a whole stack of research here. We have studies from Northwestern, we have FBI data, we have reports from the UK, Canada. We're going to peel back all the layers.
We're going to look at what makes the perfect victim for a news producer. We're going to talk about something called racial grammar.
That one really jumped out at me. Racial grammar.
Yeah. And we'll look at cases that happened at the exact same time, in the exact same place, that were almost identical on paper. But the media treated them like they were from different planets.
And maybe the most important part, we're going to see how all this coverage, all this attention actually ends up writing our laws. Because what happens on TV, it doesn't just stay there.
Not at all. It changes policy, it changes policing, it changes who our society decides is worth protecting.
So welcome to the deep dive. Let's start at the beginning. Because this phrase, missing white woman syndrome, it sounds very modern, right? Like something that started on a blog or as a hashtag.
You'd think so, but no. It actually comes from the highest echelons of journalism.
From someone who was in the room where it happened, so to speak.
Exactly. We have to go back to 2004. The setting is the Unity, Journalists of Color Conference. And on a panel is the absolute legend, Gwen Ifill.
I mean, a titan of the industry. PBS, NBC. She knew how the sausage was made.
She knew everything. She saw the budgets, she saw the rundowns, she knew which stories got killed and which ones got a primetime special, and she just cut right through all the jargon and said it. She said, I call it the missing white woman search syndrome.
Wow. Just laid it out there.
Laid it out there. And her next sentence is the key. She said, if there's a missing white woman, we're going to cover that every day.
Every day. That's the part. It's not just that it gets covered once, it's the serialization of it, the commitment.
That's the word. The commitment to the narrative. She was pointing out that a white woman's tragedy becomes a national drama series with daily updates. But a tragedy in a black or brown community, it's treated as a local crime blotter item, a statistic.
It's the difference between being the lead story and being on the ticker at the bottom of the screen.
Precisely. Gwen Ifill gave a name to a feeling that so many people had for decades, that their loved ones just didn't matter as much to the people running the cameras.
Okay, so let's get into the anatomy of this. If we were, and I know this sounds cynical, but if we were a cable news producer casting for our next big missing person story, what's the profile? What are the specs for the perfect victim?
Well, the archetype is often called the damsel in distress, and the criteria are surprisingly specific. First, The obvious demographics.
Yeah.
Young, white, and conventionally attractive.
Right. Not just attractive, but attractive in a very specific, non-threatening, mainstream way.
Yes. But it's more than that. It's about class. And this is crucial. Perceived innocence. The victim has to be seen as worthy of a national rescue effort.
Worthy. What does that mean in this context?
It generally means she's from an upper middle class background. She's a student or has a respectable job. She comes from a stable two-parent family. There's no criminal record, no hint of a messy life.
The girl with the bright future, the one who lit up every room she walked into. You hear those phrases over and over.
Every single time. It's part of the script.
But let's look at what happens when some of those boxes aren't checked, because I think some people might hear this and think it's only about race. But you found a case that shows how class and this idea of innocence are just as important. The case of Tiffany Witten.
This is such a heartbreaking and telling example. It was detailed in the 2016 Esquire article. Tiffany Witten was a 26-year-old white woman from Georgia who went missing. So on the surface, you see her picture, you think, okay, young white woman, this fits.
Right. So according to the theory, she should have been on every news channel.
She should have been. But there was almost total media silence. And the reason why tells you everything you need to know.
So what was different about her?
Tiffany's life wasn't neat. It wasn't the perfect victim narrative. She was a mother, but she was also struggling with drug addiction. She was unemployed at the time she disappeared. She was on parole for theft.
Ah, so she wasn't the innocent damsel.
In the eyes of a news producer, she was complicated. Her story wasn't a simple good versus evil fairy tale. In 24-hour news, they hate complicated.
It muddies a narrative.
It does. And her mother's experience trying to get coverage was just brutal. She said she reached out to producers from major crime shows. She even mentioned the Nancy Grace Show, which at the time was the absolute epicenter of this kind of coverage.
Oh yeah, if you were a missing white woman, that was your primetime slot.
And according to Tiffany's mother,
Yeah.
the producers basically told her they weren't interested.
They just said that to the mother of a missing person. Sorry, not interested.
That was the allegation, yes. Because her story didn't fit the mold. The journalist who wrote the piece, Tom Junod, he called the media's selection process ruthlessly selective. He argued that as soon as you introduce things like addiction or a criminal record, the audience's sympathy starts to curdle into judgment.
You stop seeing the victim as someone like your own daughter, and you start seeing them as someone who made bad choices.
Exactly. The narrative shifts from let's find her to what did she do to get into this situation?
It's like you're casting a character in a movie, and if the hero has too many flaws, you think the audience won't root for them, so you don't make the movie.
That is a perfect, if chilling, way to put it. And this whole selection process, it relies on this underlying structure. A sociologist named Eduardo Bonilla Silva has a term for it that you mentioned earlier.
Racial grammar. It's such a powerful phrase. It really stuck with me. Can you break down what he means by that?
Sure. So think about grammar in English. It's the set of invisible rules that we all follow to make sense. We don't consciously think, okay, subject, verb, object. We just talk. And if someone uses bad grammar, it just sounds wrong to our ears.
That's intuitive.
Right. Bonilla Silva argues that our society has a racial grammar, an invisible set of rules that we all learn, which treats whiteness as the default, the normal, the universal standard.
So a white person's story is just a human story, but a black person's story is specifically a black story.
You've got it. So when a white woman is in danger, the racial grammar frames it as a universal tragedy that should concern everyone. The implied message is, this could be your daughter, your sister, no matter who you are. We're all expected to see ourselves in her.
But that empathy is not expected to flow the other way.
Never. The grammar tells us that violence against a black woman is a community-specific problem. It's a them problem, not a us problem. It's seen as, sadly, more normal, more expected.
It's a background noise versus a siren.
That's a great way to put it. Charlton McIlwain, a professor at NYU, he says that white women hold this privileged position in our culture as the ultimate victims of violent crime. They are the figures who are supposed to be protected above all others. So when that system fails, it's a profound shock to the social order.
But when a black woman is harmed,
The culture sort of tragically shrugs and says, well, what do you expect in those neighborhoods? The racial grammar has already coded her as less valuable, less innocent, less worthy of a national panic.
it is literally the difference between a tragedy and a statistic.
That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, so I want to play devil's advocate for a minute. For the skeptic listening who's thinking, okay, this all sounds plausible, I see the logic, But is it real, or is this just confirmation bias? Do we just remember the big, high-profile cases like Leslie Peterson and forget all the others? We need the data.
And that's the right question to ask. For a long time, this was just an observation, an anecdote. But then, in 2016, a sociologist at Northwestern University named Zach Summers decided to actually quantify it.
Okay, so how do you even do that? How do you measure media intensity? That seems so subjective.
It's a really smart study design. What Summers did was he took two data sets. On one hand, he had the FBI's official missing persons database. That's the ground truth. That's who is actually factually missing in the United States.
The reality.
The reality. On the other hand, he compiled all the news coverage of missing persons from 4 major media outlets, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and a major regional paper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
So he's comparing what's on the screen to what's in the FBI's files.
Exactly. He was looking for the gaps, the discrepancies, and he found 2 huge things.
Okay. What was the first?
The first was just about baseline visibility. He found that Black people of all ages and genders were disproportionately less likely to be mentioned in the news at all compared to how often they go missing. So there's a blackout right from the start.
So if you're a Black person who's gone missing, your odds of even getting a single mention are already lower.
Much lower. But the second finding is the one that really gets to the syndrome part. He measured the intensity of the coverage.
And what does that mean? Like minutes of airtime?
It means number of articles per case, the duration of the coverage over days or weeks, whether the story got updates. And he found that when a missing white woman does get covered, the nature of that coverage is fundamentally different. It's more intense. It's stickier.
So a missing Black teenager might get a single 30-second report. Police are looking for so-and-so. She was last seen here. Call this number. End of story.
Right. But a missing white woman gets the whole package. Day 5 of the search. A look inside her diary. An exclusive interview with her best friend. Tonight. A candlelight vigil.
It becomes a recurring series, a drama that unfolds for the audience night after night.
And that repetition is what lodges a victim in the public consciousness. You see a face once on the news, you forget it an hour later. You see that same face every night for 3 weeks, you start to feel like you know her, you become personally invested in the outcome.
And you feel like you're part of the search.
Exactly. You feel a stake in it.
Now, there was another study you sent over that I thought was fascinating because it adds a really important layer of nuance here. The 2019 study by Slakoff and Fradella. Because we tend to frame this as a simple Black versus white issue.
Right, and they found it's a little more complex than that. They looked at the news coverage and found something really unexpected. It wasn't just a case of white women get all the coverage and women of color get none.
Okay, so what did they find?
They found that in their sample, non-Black women of color, so specifically Asian and Latina women, were actually represented at rates pretty similar to white women, sometimes even slightly overrepresented compared to their missing persons statistics.
Really? So the invisibility isn't applied equally across all non-white groups?
Not in the same way, which led them to their big conclusion. They argued that missing white woman syndrome is, in fact, a bit of a misnomer.
A misnomer. So what did they propose instead?
They suggested that a more accurate name for the phenomenon would be the specific underrepresentation of Black women syndrome.
Wow, that puts a much finer point on it. It's not just a preference for whiteness. It's a specific and measurable anti-Blackness.
The data really backs that up. In their study sample, Black women and girls accounted for over a third more than 33% of all the actual missing persons cases.
A third of all missing women and girls are Black.
Yes, but they only accounted for about 20% of the news stories.
Yeah.
That is a massive, massive gap between reality and representation. You're basically erasing 1 out of every 3 Black victims from the public narrative.
Let's ground this in the big FBI numbers for a second, just so people can really understand the scale of what we're talking about. This isn't a few dozen cases a year.
No, not even close. The FBI's National Crime Information Center, the NCIC, in 2020 alone, had over 540,000 active missing person files entered into its system.
500,000 people. In 1 year, that's the entire population of a city like Sacramento or Atlanta, just gone.
It's staggering. And when you break down those 540,000 files by race, the disparity is just impossible to ignore. In that 2020 data, Black people made up roughly 35% of all missing person files.
35%. Let's repeat that. And to put that in context, Black people make up about 13% of the U.S. population.
Correct. So they are overrepresented in the missing population by almost a factor of 3.
while being, as we just established, massively underrepresented in the news coverage.
The very definition of a crisis that is being ignored.
Yeah.
Now, compare that to white people, including Hispanics in this particular FBI grouping. They made up about 61% of the missing files.
Okay, 61%.
But they represent close to 80% of the U.S. population. So white people are actually underrepresented in the missing persons data relative to their share of the population.
So this is what you were saying earlier. It's a complete inversion of reality. If your only source of information was the evening news, you would be convinced that the single greatest danger in America is being a young white woman.
You'd be terrified for them. You'd think they were being abducted constantly.
When in reality, the data clearly shows that Black Americans, and particularly Black women, are going missing at a far, far higher rate, and we just don't talk about it.
It's a curated reality designed to focus our fear and our sympathy on one specific group, while rendering another group suffering invisible.
So that brings us to the big question, why? Why does the media do this? We talked about the damsel archetype, but let's dig into the psychology of how these stories are told. Because it can't just be that news producers are sitting in a room thinking, let's be racist today. They're chasing an audience. They're chasing ratings. So what is it about these specific narratives that hooks us?
A lot of it comes down to a really simple but powerful binary: blame versus innocence. Sociologists argue that the media frames victims differently by race in order to tap into pre-existing societal biases and stereotypes.
Okay, so lay it out for us. What does the typical white narrative sound like compared to the Black narrative?
When a white woman goes missing, the story is always framed as a story of loss. The coverage focuses on her positive roles in the community.
The things we mentioned: she's a mother, she's a beloved teacher, a straight-A student.
Exactly. She volunteered at the animal shelter. The subtext, the unspoken message is, her life has value to all of us. Her absence leaves a hole in the fabric of society, and we must find her to repair it.
And the Black narrative, assuming there even is one.
Assuming there is one. If the story gets any airtime at all, it often pivots very quickly to focus on pathology or risk.
What do you mean by that?
The reporting will subtly, or not so subtly, introduce details that imply she was in some way responsible for her own fate. They'll mention she had a troubled past, or she was last seen arguing with her boyfriend, or it happened in a high-crime neighborhood.
So it's victim blaming, baked right into the reporting.
It's pure victim blaming. The subtext shifts entirely. It's no longer, this is a terrible tragedy. It becomes, this is the unfortunate but perhaps predictable consequence of her lifestyle.
Wow. And once you do that, you give the audience an out. You give them permission not to care.
You absolutely do. You absolve them of the responsibility of empathy. Because if she's partly to blame, then we don't need to mount a national search party for her. It's not our problem anymore. It's tragic, but it's her tragedy, not ours.
It's a way of stripping the humanity from the victim to justify our own inaction.
And it feeds into this idea that Kim Pasqualini from the National Center for Missing Adults talked about. She called it the woman in jeopardy genre.
A genre, like it's entertainment.
Well, that's the uncomfortable truth, isn't it? We consume these stories like they're the latest season of a true crime docuseries. We watch them like episodes of Law & Order. And for that show to work, for the ratings to be good, you need a protagonist the audience can root for. You need the perfect damsel.
It even applies outside of missing persons cases, doesn't it? I'm thinking of some of the huge murder trials. Amanda Knox, Jodi Arias, Casey Anthony.
Oh, absolutely. That's the other side of the coin. Even when the young, attractive white woman is the accused, the villain of the story, she is still the star. She's still the center of the universe.
The national obsession. We dissect her motives, her looks, her diary.
We give her a primetime special, a Netflix deal. But a black woman accused of a similar crime. She's just a criminal. There's no glamour, no intrigue, no multi-part series exploring her psyche.
The damsel can be in distress, or she can be the femme fatale. But either way, she is always the main character.
Always. And this is where we have to bring in the concept of intersectionality. I know it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but it is the perfect analytical tool for this.
It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, right, to explain this exact kind of situation.
Exactly. It explains why black women, specifically, fall through the tracks of our cultural concern. A black woman faces racism, which devalues her life in a society structured around whiteness. And she faces sexism, which makes all women vulnerable to certain types of violence.
But it's a combination of the two.
It's the compounding effect. She doesn't have the racial privilege that protects white women, and she doesn't have the male privilege that can, in some ways, shield men. She exists at the intersection of two forms of marginalization, and that intersection is a blind spot for the media.
The place where nobody is looking.
The place where nobody is looking.
This is a good time to pivot to the comparative case studies, because talking about it in theory is one thing, but when you see it happen in real time, it's undeniable. You've pulled some examples where it's like history ran its own A/B test.
And the most famous one, the one that I think really opened a lot of people's eyes to this, is the case of Laci Peterson in 2002.
I remember that so vividly you couldn't escape it.
Laci Peterson. Modesto, California, 27 years old, white, 8 months pregnant. She disappears on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
I mean, from a news producer's perspective, it had every possible element.
The holiday angle, the beautiful victim, the handsome, suspicious husband, the Scott Peterson. It was a perfect storm.
CNN basically became the Laci Peterson network for months on end.
Absolutely. But at the exact same time, in the exact same part of the world, someone else disappeared.
Yes. In that same year, in the Bay Area, a woman named Evelyn Hernandez went missing.
Tell us about Evelyn.
Evelyn Hernandez was a 24-year-old Hispanic woman. She was also pregnant, 9 months pregnant. She vanished from San Francisco, just an hour's drive from Modesto.
So, an almost identical fact pattern. Young, heavily pregnant, Bay Area, vanishes without a trace.
The parallels are uncanny, and they get even more tragic. Laci Peterson's body was eventually discovered washed up in the San Francisco Bay.
Right, I remember that.
Evelyn Hernandez's torso was also found washed ashore in the San Francisco Bay.
My God. It's the same story.
It's the same story. But the coverage could not have been more different. Laci Peterson became a household name. There were vigils, magazine covers, TV movies. There's literally a law named after her and her unborn son.
And Evelyn Hernandez.
A footnote. The local paper, the San Francisco Chronicle, actually wrote an article at the time pointing out the glaring disparity. But the national media they didn't care. She didn't fit the profile.
What was different? Was it just that she was Hispanic?
That was a huge part of it, of course. But her class and background also played a role. She was a single mother, an immigrant from El Salvador. She worked as a vocational nurse. She didn't have that polished, suburban, upper-middle-class life that Laci did.
She wasn't the perfect victim. So the media looked at her story and said, tragic, but not a blockbuster. And they looked at Laci's story and saw ratings gold.
That's the cold, hard truth of it. Let's jump forward a few years to 2005, the year of Natalee Holloway.
The Aruba case, another one that was just everywhere.
An 18-year-old white girl from a wealthy suburb in Alabama goes missing on a high school graduation trip. It was an absolutely terrifying story, and it deserved coverage. But the scale of the coverage was astronomical. It was the story of the summer.
I feel like some cable news anchors built their entire careers on that one story. It was on every single night for months.
It was. But in that same exact summer, in Philadelphia, a 25-year-old woman named Latoya Figueroa disappeared.
Okay.
Latoya was black and Hispanic. She was 5 months pregnant. She was already a mother to a young daughter.
And the coverage.
Crickets. Absolute silence from the national media. Her family was screaming for help, trying to get anyone to pay attention. It wasn't until a few bloggers and local activists started raising hell online, specifically contrasting her case with the wall-to-wall coverage of Natalee Holloway, that the story got any traction.
So they had to shame the media into covering it.
They had to. And even then, when CNN finally did a segment, the segment itself was framed as, why is no one covering the Latoya Figueroa case?
Oh, that's so cynical.
Yeah.
So they didn't just cover her story, they covered the controversy around the lack of coverage.
Precisely. They made the meta-narrative the story, instead of just centering the missing pregnant woman of color and helping her family find her. It was a brief moment of media self-reflection, but it didn't actually translate into sustained, intense coverage for Latoya herself.
There's one more case in the section that I think is maybe the most bizarre and revealing of them all. Because it shows how this bias is so ingrained, the media will literally invent a crime to fit the narrative. This is the blonde angel case from Greece.
Oh, this one is just, it's infuriating on every level.
Yeah.
So this is 2013. Greek police conduct a raid on a Roma settlement, what many people would pejoratively call a gypsy camp.
Okay.
And inside one of the homes, they find a little girl. She's about 4 years old. And she has platinum blonde hair, fair skin, and blue eyes.
And she's living with a Roma family who are typically darker skinned.
Exactly. And the police, and then instantly, the global media, they take one look at this little blonde child among these brown-skinned people, and they jump to a single immediate conclusion.
She must have been kidnapped.
She must be a stolen white child. They literally nicknamed her the Blonde Angel. The story went viral worldwide. Who is this lost little angel abducted by gypsies? It played into every single racist, centuries-old stereotype you can imagine.
And calls started pouring in from all over the world, right?
Thousands of them. Parents of missing children from the US, from the UK, from all over Europe were calling Greek authorities thinking maybe, just maybe, this was their long-lost daughter.
So what was the actual truth?
The truth came from a DNA test a few days later. The little girl was Roma. Her biological mother was an impoverished Roma woman from Bulgaria. The family she was living with hadn't kidnapped her. Her mother had given the child to them in an informal adoption because she couldn't afford to care for her.
There was no crime. She wasn't a stolen white child at all. She was just a pale-skinned Roma girl living with other Roma people.
The entire international news frenzy was a complete fabrication, built entirely on the color of a child's skin and hair. A Romani rights activist made such a powerful point at the time. He said, imagine the reverse. Imagine if police raided a wealthy white suburban home and found a brown-skinned child living there.
They would never assume kidnapping. They'd assume the family adopted the child.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's the default assumption. Whiteness is coded as normal and rightful owner, while brownness is coded as suspicious and criminal. The blonde angel case is the ultimate proof that the media is so hungry for the missing white woman narrative that it will hallucinate one into existence even when it's not there.
That's a perfect way to put it. The bias is so strong it actually hallucinates crimes that fit its worldview.
Yes.
Let's touch on one final comparison here, because it takes the concept out of the realm of domestic crime and into war and military heroism. The story of Jessica Lynch.
This is a masterclass in how narratives are constructed by the media and in this case by the military's PR machine. So it's 2003, the early days of the Iraq War. An American Army convoy makes a wrong turn and gets ambushed.
I remember this being one of the first big dramatic stories of that war.
It was, and there are 3 female soldiers in one of the Humvees who are central to this story. There's Private Jessica Lynch, who is 19, white and blonde. There's Specialist Shoshana Johnson, who is black and a single mother. And there's Private First Class Lori Pistua, who is Hopi Indigenous and also a single mother.
All in the same vehicle, all in the same ambush.
All in the same ambush. In the attack, Lori Pistua fought back fiercely, but was killed. She became the first Native American woman in U.S. history to die in combat. Shoshana Johnson was shot in both of her ankles and taken as a prisoner of war. Jessica Lynch sustained serious injuries in the crash and was also taken prisoner.
3 women. 1 killed, 2 captured. 3 heroes. But who did the media turn into a global icon?
Jessica Lynch. And only Jessica Lynch. The initial reports, fueled by leaks in the Pentagon, painted her as this Rambo-like figure who went down fighting, firing her weapon until she was out of ammunition. They focused on her youth, her blonde hair, her small-town West Virginia roots.
The perfect all-American girl hero.
She was turned into a living legend overnight. But here's the most incredible part of the story. When Jessica Lynch was finally rescued and brought home, she refused to play along with the myth.
Right. She herself pushed back against the hero narrative.
She did, and with incredible courage. She testified before Congress, and she said, and I'm quoting her here, "I am still confused as to why they chose to lie and tried to make me a legend." She explicitly used her platform to correct the record and to honor her fellow soldiers. He said people like Lori Pistua and Shoshana Johnson were the real heroes, that Lori fought until the very end.
It's just so powerful when the person who is being elevated by this biased system turns around and says, stop looking at me. Look at the people of color next to me whose stories you are erasing.
It's the ultimate confirmation that this focus isn't accidental. It is a deliberate choice. A choice to center the white narrative, even on a battlefield where everyone is supposed to be wearing the same uniform.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the U.S. context. Let's broaden the lens. Is this a uniquely American problem? Or is this something that we see in other Western countries as well?
It is absolutely an international phenomenon, especially in countries with similar racial and colonial histories. You see the same patterns play out in the UK, in Canada, even in a place like South Africa.
All right, let's go to the UK first. What's the parallel there?
In the UK, the most frequently cited example is the stark contrast between the Soham murders and the murder of a boy named Damilola Taylor.
Okay, can you remind us of the details of those cases?
The Soham murders happened in 2002. 2 10-year-old white girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, were murdered by a school caretaker. It was a national trauma. The entire country came to a standstill. The media coverage was just absolute saturation for weeks and weeks.
I mean, that's understandable. The murder of 2 10-year-olds is a horrific story.
It is a horrific story. But in that same general time period, in 2000, A 10-year-old black boy named Jamalola Taylor was stabbed to death on his way home from the library in South London. Another horrific story.
And the media reaction.
It was so muted in comparison that it actually caused a public scandal. The disparity was so obvious and so offensive that Sir Ian Blair, who was the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, so we're talking about the top police officer in all of London, he publicly called out the media for it.
The head of the police called them out.
Yes. He flat out accused the British press of institutional racism. He said, quote, "It is a simple fact that murders in minority communities do not seem to interest the mainstream media." He talked about how he had to practically beg for coverage for Damalola Taylor, while the Soham girls were, rightly, on every front page every single day.
To have the head of the police say that, that's an incredible admission from inside the system.
It's a damning indictment. And you see another level of this in the UK with class, too. People contrast the coverage of Millie Dowler, a white middle-class schoolgirl who was murdered, with that of Hannah Williams, a white working-class girl who was also murdered. Hannah had a nose-cut, estranged parents. She didn't fit the perfect victim profile, and her case got far less attention.
So it's that same intersection of race and class and perceived innocence playing out there too.
Exactly the same.
Okay, what about Canada?
In Canada, the conversation is dominated by the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, often abbreviated as MMIWG.
This has become a huge national issue in Canada in recent years, a focus of their truth and reconciliation efforts.
It has, finally. But for decades upon decades, it was a silent epidemic. And the research on the media disparity there is just staggering. A 2008 study looked at the data and found that an Indigenous woman who goes missing in Canada receives, on average, 27 times less newspaper coverage than a missing white woman.
Wait, say that number again?
27 times less.
That's not a gap, that's a black hole.
It's a complete erasure. And the study also analyzed the tone of the coverage. It found that the few articles that were written about missing Indigenous women were brief, dispassionate, and read like a police report. Woman, age 32, missing. Last seen wearing a blue jacket.
Just the facts. No humanity.
Zero humanity. But the articles about missing white women were overflowing with it. They were emotional, detailed, filled with quotes from family and friends talking about her dreams and her personality.
It's the difference between reporting on a lost item and reporting on a lost human being.
That's precisely it. And finally, let's look at South Africa. This one is really interesting because it's a black majority country. But the legacy of apartheid means that media ownership and cultural power still often reflect the old racial hierarchy.
And the case that brings this into focus is the Oscar Pistorius trial.
Right, the Blade Runner, a global celebrity who murdered his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, a famous white model. It became the O.J. Simpson trial of South Africa. It was broadcast live around the world.
But there was a parallel case there as well.
Yes. At roughly the same time, another beautiful South African model named Zanele Khumalo was brutally murdered by her boyfriend under very similar circumstances.
Let me guess. She was black, and the story got no international attention.
Not only no international attention, but very little sustained national attention in South Africa itself. A South African government official named Sandile Mumla wrote this scathing op-ed about it. He said the media's obsession with the white victim, Steenkamp, while ignoring the agony of the black victim's family, the Khumalo family, amounted to structural racism. He argued that even in a country where black people are the vast majority, the media still operates as if a white life is inherently more valuable and more newsworthy.
Yeah, it's devastating how consistent the pattern is. No matter the country, no matter the context, the hierarchy seems to hold.
It does. Which brings us to what is maybe the most critical part of this whole deep dive, the so what question. It's easy to hear all this and think, okay, the media is biased, that's terrible. But is it just about what's on TV? Does it actually have tangible, real-world consequences?
Does it change the law? Does it change how police departments allocate resources?
It absolutely changes the world. And the most obvious way it does that is through legislation. Public outrage, driven by intense media coverage, is one of the most powerful forces in politics. When the public is screaming about a particular type of crime, politicians respond. They pass laws.
And they often name those laws after the victims who were at the center of the media firestorm.
Let's just list a few. Megan's Law.
Named after Megan Conca, a young white girl.
Jess's Law.
Named after Jessica Lunsford, a young white girl.
Kaylee's Law.
Named after Kaylee Anthony, a young white girl.
Lacey and Connor's Law.
Named after Lacey Peterson, a white woman, and her unborn son.
You see the pattern. It's undeniable.
It is.
These named laws are almost always tough on crime measures. They create sex offender registries. They impose mandatory minimum sentences. They increase penalties. There are legislative responses born out of a moral panic that is laser-focused on the perceived threat to white women and children.
So, because the media elevates the stories of this one demographic, our entire legal framework for dealing with these crimes gets built around protecting that specific demographic.
100%. Meanwhile, the systemic issues that lead to the disproportionate disappearance and murder of black women or indigenous women, things like poverty, domestic violence, lack of social services, police indifference, those issues don't get the breaking news treatment, so they don't get the named legislation.
And beyond the laws themselves, it has to affect the actual searches on the ground, the allocation of police time, money, resources.
Massively. There was a study done in 2020 by the Wyoming Urban Indian Health Institute that looked specifically at missing indigenous people. It found that media outlets were far less likely to run a profile of a missing indigenous person while the search was still active.
So they only get coverage after they're found dead.
Often, yes, which is obviously too late. The entire point of the media coverage is to generate tips to help find the person alive. But this study found a detail that just floored me. It found that the few articles that were written about missing indigenous people were significantly less likely to even include a photograph of the missing person.
Wait, how can you run a missing person story without a photo? That is the single most important piece of information. Have you seen this person is the entire point.
It's malpractice. Or, if there was a photo, it was often a grainy, low-quality image, sometimes even a mugshot, which further criminalizes the victim. Meanwhile, the missing white victim gets the beautiful, high-resolution professional portrait or the smiling graduation photo.
You are actively sabotaging the search effort by failing to humanize the victim for the public.
And then, when no tips come in, the police can say, well, there are no leads. It becomes this tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy of neglect.
So let's try to wrap this all up. We've covered a ton of ground here. We started with Gwen Ifill giving this phenomenon a name. We looked at the hard data that proves the disparity is real. We broke down the psychology of the Damsel narrative. We saw it in action with case studies from the US and all around the world. And now we see how it literally shapes our laws and our police work.
It's a powerful, self-perpetuating system. It's not about one bad producer making one bad call. It's a deep-seated cultural habit.
So what's the takeaway for the person who's been listening to all this, the person back on that couch where we started? What do we do with this information?
I think the biggest thing is to become a more conscious, more critical consumer of media. The news business, at the end of the day, is a business. They're chasing our eyeballs, our clicks, our attention.
We vote with our remote control, or with our thumb on the screen.
We absolutely do. And if we, the audience, only show interest in the serialized drama of the missing white cheerleader, then that's the only story they're ever going to tell.
Yeah.
We have to be aware of a couple of cognitive biases that the research points to. One is the availability heuristic.
Can you give us the quick definition of that?
The availability heuristic is our brain's tendency to judge how common something is based on how easily we can think of an example of it.
So if you see stories about missing white women on the news every single night,
your brain concludes that missing white women must be the most common and pressing crisis, even if the objective data says that indigenous women or black men are going missing at a much higher rate. Your reality is shaped by what's readily available in your memory, which is shaped by the media.
And the other one was mean world syndrome.
Yeah, that's the idea that heavy consumption of media, particularly crime news, leads you to believe the world is a much more dangerous and frightening place than it actually is. But specifically, it makes you believe it's more dangerous for the people you see being victimized on screen. It creates this misplaced sense of fear and anxiety.
So the final thought here is that the next time you see that red breaking news banner with a smiling face,
you have to stop for a second and ask yourself a question. It's not why am I seeing this story, it's who am I not seeing? Whose disappearance today didn't merit a breaking news banner? Is the world really most dangerous for the person on my screen? Or is the media spotlight just stuck in one place, reinforcing a hierarchy of human value that we need to challenge?
It's realizing that what we see isn't the whole picture, it's a curated slice of reality.
And once you see that, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And recognizing that hierarchy is always the first step to dismantling it.
This was a heavy one, but a really important one. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Absolutely. The key is to just keep questioning the narrative.
We'll see you next time.